way that the contract of carriage is written for these low cost carriers is the last person to check in is the first one to get bumped. So if you do get involuntarily bumped, it's because you checked in too late. So I'd say be careful about that too. If I'm flying a low cost carrier, they load from back to front, from left to right. So as you check in, you can kind of game it to see what seat you want and wait and check in at that time. Just don't wait until they go past the second exit row, because then you're in that territory of potentially getting involuntarily bumped.
Hey there, points people! You just heard a clip from Megan Cox of Top Knots and Layovers. Megan is an MIT ops grad optimizing travel. She dives deep into fare buckets, points, and transfer partners and loves optimizing travel status. But what might surprise you about this luxury traveler is that she's also super well versed in the world of low cost carriers. In this episode, expect to hear about why status with low cost carriers in the USA might be a great fit for you, easy ways to get status with different airlines, tricks to avoid the usual headaches that come with flying low-cost carriers, and so much more. If you need help planning a trip on points, check out geobreezetravel.com/request. There, you can submit a request for a free personalized step-by-step tutorial specific to your travel dates, routes, and points. We pick one of these requests to prepare every week in our free GeoBreeze Travel newsletter, so check out our newsletter every Monday to see if your award search tutorial was picked and prepared. And now, on with the show. Hey Megan, welcome to the GeoBreeze Travel Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
I'm so excited to have you here and very excited to talk about low-cost carriers, which we don't often talk about on this show. We normally just focus on the same old, oh, there's Air France deals, British Airways deals, Qatar deals. And so we're going to mix it up a little bit today and talk about why people should not sleep on a lot of the low-cost carriers and how you can find some pretty good deals that aren't tragedies on them. So before we get into all of that, tell us a little bit about you. What got you into the world of points, miles, flight deals, and all of that?
Sure. So I'm Megan, also known as Top Knots and Layovers on TikTok. I'm primarily a content creator on TikTok, and I focus on optimization of status, points redemptions, really anything. I like to kind of creep into the crevices that no one else is, and I'm on the road about 180 days a year. I remember reading the points guy in college. I mean, I've always been into travel. Actually, I should back it up. My first W 2 job that I took when I was actually getting paid legally and not just cash under the table, I saved up every paycheck for the first year and a half to go travel to Europe. My parents told me that they would match whatever I saved. So it was like a $5,000 trip, which to me now is insane. Like, how was I spending $5,000 as a 16-year-old on a stupid group trip? Like, I never do group tours, but that was my introduction to travel. And since then, I've just been trying to get out like all the time. Just want to go see the world. But the points and miles part, I started reading the points guy in college. So maybe my first introduction was like 2013 or 2014. And I thought, oh, someday I'd really like to do that. Like, I want to do what they're doing. But I didn't take a corporate job out of college. I went straight into entrepreneurship, started a company, moved to China. So it took me until about now to really get into the points and miles game, because I just didn't have that corporate travel to kind of fill in my points balance all the time.
You started a company and moved to China?
Yeah, actually, I saw that you studied abroad in China.
I did.
I didn't know we had that commonality.
Yeah, I was in like Hangzhou, Shanghai, Lhasa, Xi'an, Beijing. We went all over. Where were you?
I lived in Shenzhen for 3 years, and that's where my husband's from. I actually would love to go to Tibet. I haven't been yet. I need time, like, I need enough time off to actually go up there and explore.
It was a 50-hour train ride. We did not fly into Lhasa. We took, I guess, a 30-hour train from Xi'an, which is in the middle of China, and then 50 hours back out where we went to Beijing. And oh, if any of you saw that story where I was telling the story of the toilet situation on this train where it's like a little hole in the ground and you see the train tracks passing by and you're squatting, and if you're a girl, this is very difficult if you've never done this before and you're not really into camping. So that was a fun 50 hours, but I don't know if your experience was a little bit more luxurious than that when you were living in China.
Working for myself straight out of college, please. No, no, no. I not luxurious at all. But I do have a lot of experience peeing into Chinese toilets now. Doing it over the train track sounds like an extra level of difficulty, but I'd be down for the challenge.
We were like, let's just get our squats in. Here we go. Let's go.
There's a little bit of physics to it, depending on the depth of the toilet, but we'll leave that for another time.
Yeah. All right. So you started a company.
You moved to China. At what point did you move back or move out?
At the end of 2017, the firewall in China was getting so strong, and China was buying out all the VPN companies. I was like, wow, this is not tenable. So we moved to Thailand for a bit, and then we moved back. My husband, well, he's my fiance at the time, we moved back to the US at the end of 2017, early 2018, and I sold my company and started a new one at that time.
And throughout all of this, were you experiencing different low-cost carriers or trying different flight deals? What were you doing travel-wise during this time?
Yeah, when I lived in China, I would take any excuse that I could to travel because I lived in Shenzhen, which is right on the border of Hong Kong. So from Hong Kong, it is so cheap to get anywhere. And Hong Kong Express must have been, I think they're like 11 years old now. So they must have been like a 3 or 4 year old carrier at that point, and they would have deals all the time where all you had to do was cover the taxes and the tickets were free. So my husband and I would take advantage of this every single time. And we would go to Cambodia, Thailand, Korea. We did go to Japan at some point. I think we probably paid like 300 Hong Kong dollars for those tickets, but normally 15, $20 we were on the plane down to wherever in Southeast Asia. So it was a really great way to see a lot of places. I know a lot of people now, especially people that follow me, say they can't find the time off to go to Asia. So I'm really grateful I had all those early experiences.
Does Hong Kong Express still have these kinds of deals? Or if somebody is like, "I've got time, let's go to Hong Kong, let's hop around." Does
Yeah.
this still exist?
Yes. So they actually this week had a deal. It was they could do all kinds of things because there's not the same laws that we have here. They had a deal where for people 65 and older, they could fly for 2 Hong Kong dollars, which is like 30 cents. That was going on this week, but they regularly have deals. I would say now the deals are probably like 100 Hong Kong dollars, which is like $15 plus the taxes. So you're paying a little bit. It really doesn't make a difference, but it was just always very attractive to me to be like, "Oh, I can fly for free and just pay the taxes." It's like non-revving without having to actually have the job. It's great. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're still tracking these different deals even though you're not in Hong Kong.
Yeah, who's to say I'm not gonna go back? Who's to say I'm not gonna go back and live in China at any point? So, yeah, I track the deals, and last year I did the AirAsia Pass all over Asia, and I really considered at that point, like, do I need to have a condo again in China? Like, should I base myself out of China for a while because you could travel anywhere. It was also, like, non-revving. All the tickets were essentially free, you just paid the taxes.
What is the AirAsia Pass?
I do so many of these things, I feel rusty now. I'm pretty sure, like, 699 ringgit. It was around $300 US, and you could fly anywhere within the AirAsia network, including, but not limited to, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, to Honolulu, Japan, all through Southeast Asia, up to I don't know about Seoul, actually. I did fly them from Seoul to Manila, but I don't know that was included, and then out to India and the Maldives. So we ended up flying for 7 weeks straight on this pass, and all we do is pay the taxes as we went, plus that one-time annual fee. It's kind of like Frontiers Go Wild Pass, like an annual one, but way better because you're not just going within one country domestically. You can fly anywhere on their network.
And for people who haven't flown AirAsia, they're based in Malaysia. And yeah, you can reach, I think, like 20% of the world's population within 5 hours of Malaysia. I heard that one time. It's crazy because you can access both China and India. So many of the world's largest cities are accessible within 5 hours of Malaysia. What is the flight experience actually like with Hong Kong Express or AirAsia?
They're all different. AirAsia has the smallest legroom I've ever experienced in my life, but they have the best food on board, and it is like $5 for a meal. So I will sometimes pre-book the meals just because I don't want to risk the opportunity of missing the food. Like the Hainan chicken, so good. Hong Kong Express, since they're based out of Hong Kong, they have a little bit of different food options. Think like curry balls, like curry fish balls, that kind of thing. I remember early on, I really loved them because out of all the carriers, they had a sparkling rosé that you could buy. It's actually really hard to get a hold of wine and champagne and sparkling wine in China. So I was like, this is a great opportunity. On board, I think the service is great. And if I'm not mistaken, they're also owned by Cathay, and you can use your Asia Miles to book flights with Hong Kong Express now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you mentioned like dabbling with status and with points and all of these. Are you using some kind of status perks or some kind of points when you do these low cost carriers, or you're like, it's $15. We don't need to know about points?
I think I've tried it all. In the US, the status with low cost carriers is great, but it can be difficult once you've achieved it to re-achieve it without a status match. In the US, like if I'm flying Frontier or Spirit, I do have top status with Frontier. My husband this year has top status with Spirit, but since everything's a la carte, the way that you're earning the points that help you requalify make it so once you've achieved status and you're getting all this stuff for free, you get the seat for free, the bag for free, the carry on for free. It's really hard to re-achieve status unless you spend a lot of money on their credit card. So sometimes I do use status with these carriers, but sometimes you just have to bite the bullet. I think that for most people, it's unless you have business spend or MS, it's not realistic to requalify for these statuses over and over.
Are you usually getting the status the first time just through a status match and then everything is free and Frontier or Spirit is like, you must spend this many $1,000 with us per year, and you're like, well, everything's free at this point, so there's no spend to be had.
Yeah, there's honestly no spin to be had. I fly Spirit all the time, and I still only have maybe 800 as like their qualifying points, which means on the base fares and add-ons, I've only spent $800 in the year, which is insane to me. They do some offers. They do have some offers. I think Frontier has a lot of creativity in their marketing department. They just honestly will throw anything at the wall and see what sticks. Spirit, on the other hand, has a slower marketing cycle, so they don't have as many fun and new cool ideas. But Frontier gives you a lot of opportunities to get in on a status match or show your loyalty to them.
What do you get with status on low cost carriers in addition to ancillary fees being waived, which is huge because that's how they make most of their money?
Yeah, that's everything. Yeah, people always on my TikTok videos would be like, "I'm not flying Spirit or Frontier because when you add it all up, you're gonna spend the same amount." Like, who's doing that? Evidently, people are doing that, and that's how these airlines are staying in business. With Frontier, they have a bunch of different levels of status, and in the past year, they renamed them to match Delta's level of status, which is hilarious to me. At the top level, you're getting the benefits for you plus up to, I want to say, 6 people on your itinerary. You get to choose seats, you get bags, carry-on, I think skis, like, you can bring sports equipment, golf bag, skis with you. You can make changes, like, all the things you can do effectively with other airlines when you have status, you can do with Frontier. Things like standby, though, same-day changes don't make sense because Frontier just flies to a place and out of a place, like, they have 1 flight in and out typically per day. On Spirit, the benefits only extend to you, no one on your ticket, which really stinks. And you'll get a seat choice, check bag, carry on, pet fee, which is great if you travel with your pet. And again, same kind of things like change fees, those types of things. But Spirit recently also changed their policies so that you can change or cancel the flights. Like the low cost carriers are really starting to look more and more like the big three, or at least American at this point. It's really strange.
Okay, so if somebody's listening to this being like, I'm not that fancy of a person and I just need to get where I'm going, and yeah, flying low cost carriers with all the ancillary fees waived sounds great. Is the best way to get the status in the first place just to status match? Because what if someone has no status in the first place?
Yeah. Frontier has a deal going on right now where if you get their credit card and you spend $3,000 in the first 90 days, that you'll have gold status for a year, which gives you most of the benefits. It doesn't extend to other people in your party. It's only for yourself, but that's good enough. So I feel like go for it. You do want to check on flightconnections.com to see the paths, the routes and the dates that they have available because the biggest complaint people have besides all the ancillary fees is the routing. And for myself personally, I will take one leg on a low cost carrier to get where I want to go, and I'll take the other leg on someone else. Like I'm okay to stitch together itineraries. So I think you have to be a little flexible, but the more you get into it and the more you push yourself to try, the more you'll see if there's some real benefit there.
For somebody who's like, okay, but if I don't have a lot of money and they want $3,000 to meet the sign up bonus on the Frontier card, is it better to do that than to just put $3,000 towards a Chase Sapphire Preferred or a Capital One or something like that? What is the opportunity cost of flying low cost carriers versus doing the game that most people talk about in the world of points and miles, which is to get the flexible points, transfer those, be like, oh my God, I got Hyatt status, I got all of this. What's kind of the opportunity cost and how does one go through that math?
Yeah, let's start from the beginning. Let's clear a few things. I am, of course, a cheerleader for low cost carriers because I love the underdog. I'm an entrepreneur myself, so I'm always great. Love the underdog, love the competition. I also, though, have executive platinum status with American Airlines, platinum status with Delta. I've got Hyatt Globalist. I have basically all the statuses except United. If you have a limited amount of funds to put on a credit card, then you really do need to think about your own travel habits and what that looks like. You can't beat a Chase Inc. sign up, right? Who doesn't love that? Some of these other ones, though, I'm not sure I would do based on the annual fee. Like, I do have a Chase Sapphire Reserve, but you're not regularly signing up for cards with $600, $700 annual fees just to get the points, are you? There are better ways to get sign up bonuses. So I think you'd have to take a hard look at your finances and the routes from your personal airport, your travel preferences, and kind of go from there. For some people, $3,000 in 90 days is no big deal. And so I think that they should really consider adding a low cost carrier to their repertoire because it's a good alternative to the big three when the big three try to monopolize certain routes or just have crazy prices and you can avoid all those other fees. Finally, maybe we didn't talk about this earlier, you can always book at the airport, which I know people say is crazy, but I book in advance at the airport all the time to save extra on the fares from the low cost carriers.
Tell us more about that. Why would you book in advance at the airport? Like you're driving to the airport to book these flights, or just, hey, I've got this flight on January 15 and I have another one that I need to take on February 15. Let's just book it in January while I happen to be at the airport. What's the mechanics of this?
I will look up the flight I want, and I will look up the breakdown of the fees, and when you see the CIC fee, that's a carrier interface charge, they only can legally charge this to you when you book the flight online, and they can charge up to $23 per segment that you're taking. So if you look at that breakdown and you see a CIC fee that's significant, you're better off booking it at the airport. So I'll write down the flight numbers and the times, and the next time I'm at the airport, I'll go to the Spirit counter or the Frontier counter and try to book it there. Frontier, the reason I told you earlier I have some beef with Frontiers, they will try with they will try everything in their power to not sell you that ticket. But Spirit is pretty good about selling you the ticket at the counter. And so in this way, on a round trip, you could save up to $46. And if you've got two flights, which again, I don't really recommend on low cost carriers, I feel like you should just take a one-way direct. Like having connecting flights is crazy, but if you do it, then it could be up to 23 per segment. So whatever that is, 92 round trip.
You mentioned that sometimes routes get monopolized by the big three in the United States. People listening to this might be like, wait, you have American Airlines Executive Platinum. Why wouldn't you just fly them all the time? Or why wouldn't you fly Delta? Why would you put yourself through Spirit or Frontier instead?
Yeah.
What are the routes where this makes sense to go for low cost rather than just use the airline where you already have top tier status?
So Spirit is a slow mover, as I said, but Frontier is quite crafty and they change up their routing all the time. Actually, you shouldn't fall in love with any route with Frontier because you don't know how long it will last. For example, I used to go to Las Vegas all the time on Frontier Direct and they cut that last year, but it could be back anytime. So I check flightconnections.com and their emails to see what they're rolling out. What Frontier did in the past year is they introduced all these routes from secondary airports to hubs. So, like from Indianapolis, we now have flights to DFW direct on Frontier. If I want to fly an international flight on American Airlines and use a system wide upgrade, I might fly Frontier down there and then just from there fly out of American since it's their hub. But they added flights to LaGuardia, to Houston, basically to all of United and American's hubs within the past year. So they really have positioned themselves to be competitive in those markets.
From secondary airports over to the hub. So you're using these low cost carriers effectively for positioning flights and then taking the big routes off of the hubs.
Yeah, I think people don't think about positioning enough because most of the content creators or influencers within the travel space live in big cities. They live in Seattle, LA, San Francisco, New York, but I live in the middle of nowhere. So repositioning is my life. This is like something I spend a lot of time working on.
Yeah, if you are in a small airport, Omaha, Nebraska, Indiana, anywhere with a college town, that could be a really good case to look into low cost carriers. That's a great point. Okay. And so you mentioned that you can get these statuses oftentimes just with a credit card sign up, meeting the minimum spend and getting status that way. I wish they would do that with a lot of the other airlines, but that's neither here nor there.
No, they do though. No, 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 no. Delta and American have moved to spend programs, and United is a spend program to some level, like not to the top, but to some level. Yeah.
Oh, yes, the revenue. I meant more so like you open a credit card and then you put 3,000 and then you get gold
Oh,
status.
no, 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 no. Keep dreaming.
Yeah, I was like, "Wait, they do that? Did I miss out on it?" No, it's yeah, the $200,000 or whatever it takes if you don't fly American Airlines at all, which I guess if you're MSing or doing something like that, you could get American Airlines status that way, but if you never actually use the benefits of the status, I always have this conversation with people of like, why go for status if you're not gonna use it? If it's just to status match or to look cool, or do you use most of your statuses, or it's just there as like a stepping stone?
To look cool is the lamest thing ever. If anybody wants my bag tags, they just arrived. You can have them. Like, there's no point to spend money on a Delta credit card. Even, oh my God, I'm even embarrassed to whip out a Delta credit card. The status is for the benefits and only for the benefits. I track all the benefits year to year, and then I determine at the end of the year, or usually at the end of Q3, whether or not keeping that status in the next year will make sense for me. Right now, I really am reevaluating my relationship with American Airlines just because I fly them relatively infrequently compared to other airlines. This year, I think I've flown them, I don't know, 8 or 10 times. And to go all the way to earn executive platinum status, even though I'm not spending 200,000 on a card, like I usually spend 30K a year, and it's mostly through their e-shopping platform to get status. But I still have to ask myself, is that the best way to allocate that spending when I could be earning, I don't know, Amex points instead with Rakuten? So it's an ongoing conversation that I have with myself if status is worth it. I would say at the place that we're at right now, post COVID, a lot of status is really not worth having unless you have a lot of dedicated spend. Like for small business owners, it's less of a question, but for individuals, yeah, I'm not sure it's worth it. It definitely doesn't make you look cool. I think it makes you look chuggy to have your bag tags on. I don't know. Sorry.
I've
It's too
never seen anybody with, like, 6 bag tags where it was just, like, United 1K and American Airlines Executive Platinum and Delta Diamond, and imagine just throwing on Spirit Diamond on there
big,
as well.
big spirit one with crayons. I have a ton of bag tags, but I when I see people out with them, I just feel like they're so proud of their bag tags, and for what? Like, I don't know, I don't get it.
I
But
forgot to put my American Airlines Executive Platinum bag tag on for, like, the better part of a year. I finally remembered to put it on my bag, but yeah, people are really, really into their bag tags, the Emirates ones, especially because that one's hard to get.
for which one?
Emirates.
Oh, it's still a piece of plastic. I'm sorry. That's too much for me.
People are really, really into their statuses, but what is your math behind if a status is worth it?
Yeah. This is the Q3 re-eval every year I was talking about. I do have a model that I showed last year. I remember how I was on a frontier trip down to Puerto Rico and I put this together on the flights. Since I track all the benefits that I receive and I mark whether or not they're from status or they're from points, I'm keeping track, therefore, of my redemption of the points. So, like, what a specific point value is to me, and also what a specific status is valued at to me. And then I made a model that was like what types of effort it would take to achieve these statuses, whether that's spending actual money on flying or like just using the card, whatever, the opportunity costs. And then I have a sheet it's like your travel style. So, like, how often are you going to fly these different airlines? How often are you going to take advantage of these benefits so that you can anticipate what the value of that status is going to be? From there, from all of this, I assigned not only my individual points value, which people didn't agree with my points value. I'm like, well, whose points value are you using? Most of them are using the points guy's value of points, right? But it only matters to you individually how you spend your points. Like, how good are you at getting redemptions? How to use them? So you got that points value, and then you got the status value per point, and then you add them together to get your total like value per point. As the rules change to the status programs, as they increase the thresholds like Delta did, or as they decrease your complimentary upgrade percentages like Delta and American really have this year, then those statuses become worth less and those values are in flux. But I'd say that the status value is much more in flux than the points value. But I look at both of them together and then from there, look at how much spending I have for the year and optimize the order of statuses I'm going to achieve. So I should really look at what I had planned for myself for 2024 and compare it. But I know that I have myself like earning globalist by May, I think I have myself re-earning executive platinum, but I might change my mind on that. Earning Delta platinum, etc.
So for each flight, are you just tracking, I did get upgraded up to domestic first class, and here's how much that ticket would have cost if I just paid for it out of pocket, and that's how you're kind of valuing your
Yeah.
status perks?
Yeah. And this year I introduced a new thing that was the opportunity or the secondary choice cost because you wouldn't so to yes, to validate your point. I will look at the time that I book the flight with points or when I book it with cash, the price of the flight and subtract any taxes. And then I will also look at the cost of the upgrade at that point, and I will put that in my sheet and mark it as this doesn't exist yet, but if this materializes, then it will stay in my model. Yes. So that is how I track that.
And this just sounds like it's very data intensive, like just the data entry of like, did I get upgraded? How much would it have cost if I had paid for this out of pocket? How much did I actually pay for it? And if you forget to do this on a flight, that data is just gone because you can't figure out the historical price of the ticket on your route very easily. There's ways to do it, but this sounds very data intensive to calculate the value of the status.
It was the secondary cost, the opportunity cost. Yes, it is. It is really data intense. I just do it systematically and track it that way. I think it's also hard because the price is so variable. And if they drop it really close to my flight, I'll go update it. So, for example, if the business class flight was 800 and the econ flight was 300, that's a $500 differential. But if they're offering the upgrade for $99 right before check in, I'll go upgrade it and be like, this is only worth $99. What I started doing this year, because people would say, calculating your cents per point is not necessarily the correct way to value what points are really worth to you, because if you wouldn't have paid the cash price, then it's a moot point. So I started tracking what my actual choice would have been for cash booking if I didn't book that the ticket. So for example, ANA first class, I've got 2 round trip tickets to Japan. I'm never going to pay $21,000 for those round trips, but I would fly EVA Air with a stop in Taipei, and those are like 3,500 or $5,000 round trip. So then I have the secondary cost too, so I can understand that. So I'm not getting blinded by these high ticket prices or like these high sticker prices that I would never pay.
It's always a weird question to me of like, how do you value those cents per point? Because if we're saying, oh, it's only worth it if you would pay that much anyway, then points are worth a lot more to rich people who would pay that anyway versus somebody who would never be able to afford business class in the first place, which I think is completely backwards. I would think that if this is your once in a lifetime opportunity because you're relatively poor and can't pay $10,000 for a business class flight, wouldn't the points be worth more to you versus somebody where they're like, oh, $10,000, we do that every month? I understand the rationale, but it also creates some weird backwards incentives in my head where I'm like, oh, so if it's only worth that much to you if you would have paid it anyway, points are worthless for poor people and worth a lot more for people who already can afford to pay for these flights out of pocket.
I see what you mean. I think it's okay for points values to be individualized. I think that that is some of the point of what I was saying earlier, that it doesn't matter. Like, we don't need a universal points value. It just comes down to what it's worth to you and how you travel. A lot of people have asked me over the years, like, why do you only fly international business class a few times a year? You're flying economy all the time. The thing is, I'm a maximalist. I would rather get as much value as possible out of my points rather than spend them on 1 or 2 redemptions.
Which also brings up another good point since you said you're on the road like 180 days per year, right?
Yeah.
It and so you have a lot of data points to try to figure out, okay, what is my status worth? What are my points worth?
Yeah.
If somebody is taking 1 or 2 vacations per year, is it worth them to try to figure out what status is worth to them or just
No.
don't do it, you guys?
Status is not worth it to you at that point. You should be racking up your points for whatever you want that experience to look like for you. If you can rack up enough points reasonably to fly business and to stay in a 5-star hotel with full board, like, go ahead, do it. It only makes sense for people that are on the road all the time. And really, that is my audience. My audience is not people who are like, how do I transfer points from Chase to Aeroplan? My audience is people who are like, I'm on the road a lot and I know a lot about these programs already. And I just want to find little loopholes and exploit them.
So we talked about some of the Asian carriers like Hong Kong Express. We talked about Air Asia, the US based low cost carriers like Frontier and Spirit. How
Yeah.
about Europe? What are some of your favorite or least favorite low cost carriers there?
I knew you're going to ask me that. I actually don't have a lot of experience traveling low cost carriers in Europe, but I just signed a 1 year lease in Portugal today. So ask me in like a year. I'll have lots of data for you.
Amazing. Because I know people are like, okay, should we like do Ryanair? Should we do like ExpressJet or whatever the other ones are?
It's a plane. At the end of the day, they have a list of rules. You follow the rules well in advance. You show up. If you messed up, you throw a few things in your pocket, you throw on a jacket, and you get on the plane. You close your eyes and you arrive to the destination. I feel like it's not rocket science. If the flight's less than 3 hours, you don't need to sweat it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. For short flights where people are like, well, I really want to take this fifth freedom flight from I forgot what the route was, Barcelona to Milan with Singapore Airlines. I might have gotten that wrong, but I mean, I love fifth freedom flights just because I get fun photos on a 2-hour flight with Swiss Airlines business class, but yeah, most of the time it's just not worth it.
No, I'm doing the SAS challenge, and I did have to ask myself, am I going to take Wizz Air from Bucharest down to somewhere in the Middle East? I don't know, like Jeddah or Riyadh. And I was like, I cannot do that. That is way too far. Like I can do it for 3 hours, but I don't know. I've flown Spirit to Lima a couple times, and that flight's I think 6 hours. That's about the limit, really.
Are there any low-cost carriers that you've ever flown where you're just like, "Oh my god, never again. I don't care if it was $15. I cannot deal with this again."
I'm sure a lot of people feel that way about AirAsia. I think around week 3 or 4, I was like, "Somebody please put me out of my misery." I love them. Look, I flew them to my honeymoon, but the legroom is really unforgivable. I don't know, in Asia, for example, there are a lot of low-cost carriers, but they're all pretty much the same. They're pretty easygoing. The service is great. There's just not much to think about. Maybe I will hate Ryanair, we'll see, but their social media is almost too good for me to ever hate them.
With low-cost carriers, I think another complaint that people often have is cancellations, where you mentioned there's 1 flight per day, and if Frontier is just like, "Sorry, guys, it's canceled," or Spirit Airlines says the same thing, you're kind of SOL at that point. You personally have status with a whole bunch of different airline and a lot of points, but for the people who are like, "I don't wanna deal with low-cost carriers because that's my one shot at getting a flight per day, or else I have to buy last minute, same day American Airlines fares," which can be kinda crazy at times. What are your thoughts on cancellations and just gambling with whether or not that flight actually happens?
Two things. Number one, that's incredibly poor planning. If you have a lot riding on this flight, you need a backup flight booked with points. And if you can't book a backup flight with points, and this is somewhere you really need to be, you should consider the lowest cash fare on a different airline. But realistically, flying basic economy on American Airlines or United, Delta, it's slightly better. They have more flights per day. Still, you're going to be in line for hours and hours and hours. So it still sucks. But what I personally did was read all of the contracts of carriage of the carriers and then made a spreadsheet of what they're responsible for and what they're not. And then I looked up the DOT rules. And then I also looked up the different credit cards I had and their different insurances. And so I have a path of who I'm going to book with what. And I know the contingency. So after flying enough times, like I know exactly what's going to happen if Spirit screws me over, Frontier screws me over. If you happen to have the Capital One Venture X card, they also have a very great option for rebooking your flight if it's disrupted. So usually when you have travel insurance through a credit card, they're going to pay for your hotel or your out-of-pocket expenses for clothes, amenities, that type of thing. But if you use this rebooking insurance on the Capital One portal, it's about 15% of your flight cost. But if the flight is delayed by a certain number of hours, I think 3, they will either give you the opportunity to rebook with any carrier you want for free, or you can stay on your flight and they will give you back the money that you paid for that flight. So you can still remain on the flight, keep your rights with the airline, but they'll pay you back that money for the flight. So the way to use this is make sure that there's going to be another flight like 4 hours later or 4.5 hours later after your original flight to still get you to your destination on time. So when I positioned to go to the Olympics, like I went from Indianapolis to New York, then I used this, but I had to make sure that there's still going to be a flight to get me to my Norse Airlines flight on time should Spirit cancel or be late or whatever. Because they did it to me one time in December of 2022 and never again. I'm literally never letting them leave me SOL again.
And the way to get this kind of coverage is you book it through Capital One, or can you repeat how to get this kind of insurance so that you can get booked on a different carrier?
Yeah. This is not your typical travel insurance, which is cancel for any reason or you're covered for delays or if your bags get damaged. This is different. This is a rebooking coverage. So if you're on the Capital One travel portal and you're booking a flight, then they will offer it to you. And it's about 15% of your flight cost. And you click there to add it on. And then if the flight is delayed by 3 hours or more, you'll go back to the portal or you'll call them and then you'll make a new booking for whatever flight you want after that point.
Do you normally book through the Capital One portal or normally direct through the airline? Because there is different benefits of booking direct versus through a portal, but I had not heard of this benefit through a portal before, which can be very handy.
Yeah, this is about the only way I book through Capital One for travel specifically, unless they're giving me some type of credit or benefit I can't get somewhere else. So this is great for low cost carriers. I never really understood why people were obsessed with booking through the Amex portal with the Amex card. I know you get 5X, but I think for most carriers, I just prefer to book direct with them because I know that then they'll handle whatever happens. Maybe I just had too many bad experiences with hotels. Like third party bookings will really screw you over. So I try to avoid it unless it makes sense. Like in China, if you're booking a flight, it can make sense. Everywhere else, you want to avoid third parties like the plague.
Yeah, I never book through third parties. It makes sense that you could book low cost carriers through a third party and you're just like, we're gambling anyway. Here
Yeah,
we are.
literally.
And Capital One covers some of that. So that's a great piece of knowledge. What are some other good tidbits? Because you mentioned you look a lot into the loopholes and the fine print on the contracts of carriage. What are some other things with specific airlines that you found?
Let me think about things I can actually talk about. I feel like there's always those tidbits of information, but you're like, oh, no, that has to be gate kept. I don't know. Everything we talked about here today is already like probably 2 levels up from general population knowledge, right? I would still struggle to explain this stuff to my parents. When I tried to tell one of my relatives to go book their Frontier ticket to the counter, they're like, "What?" It didn't make sense. So, I don't know, but I do when I find loopholes, I do expose them on my TikTok. I find loopholes all the time in Delta's language, and they're just notorious for covering it up without discussing it. Like, they do this all the time. It's very frustrating.
What's something that they've covered up before?
When they changed their lounge access, like, oh goodness, they've made so many changes in the past 2 years. They changed their lounge access so that even if you had status, but you were flying economy or basic economy on an international flight, you couldn't access their lounges. So my workaround was to book basic economy through one of their partners. Like I booked if you're flying Air France's metal or you're flying KLM's metal and you book basic economy with them and you input your Delta number, you should still be able to access the lounge. And I pointed out this in the language because when I arrived at the lounge, they made me show my Amex card to get in. And I was like, I shouldn't have to show my Amex card to have status. And here's the verbiage. And so I pointed it out, and then they like very quickly covered it up. Like probably 2 to 3 weeks later, they closed that loophole on their website. But they do this kind of stuff all the time where I just feel like their lawyers are asleep or something. Like they just leave so many loopholes in their language, and they change their terms so frequently. But at the end of the day, everything they say is, and we have the final say about everything.
So Delta is the one that tends to have most of these. How are the low cost carriers on these? Are they like, "Oh, yeah, loopholes wide open," or there's just not as much?
The problem with the low cost carriers is that their employees are not always well informed. And it seems like they also employ a lot of contractors who are not necessarily employees. And so they're even less likely to read the terms and conditions. I'll tell you some anti advice on the other side. If you are flying Frontier and they are involuntarily bumping people, do not volunteer unless you have a very expensive Frontier vacation coming up with a lot of people on that ticket. Don't volunteer. And I just sometimes you have a drink in the lounge or something, you talk to the employees at the airport. I really chat them up. So when I was in Florida last week, I was chatting with the customer service representative at the Spirit Airlines counter, and she said they also give. She's like, I don't know if they give vouchers or cash, but if they give vouchers, she told me the process. It's the same as Frontiers. So you have to use the voucher all in one go, and then any remaining value just disappears. So if you're at the Frontier gate and they're offering $1,000 to get bumped, that is going to be $1,000 Frontier voucher that you have to use all in one go. You would be hard pressed to spend $1,000 on Frontier all in one go because I'm not even sure if that voucher covers taxes. It might just cover base fare. Spirit evidently is the same. If you're on Delta and they're offering $1,000, that's going to be Visa gift cards. That is a cash equivalent. Take it. Like do whatever you want, but be careful being that involuntarily bumped person. Also, the way that the contract of carriage is written for these low cost carriers is the last person to check in is the first one to get bumped. So if you do get involuntarily bumped, it's because you checked in too late. So I'd say be careful about that too. If I'm flying a low cost carrier, they load from back to front, from left to right. So as you check in, you can kind of game it to see what seat you want and wait and check in at that time. Just don't wait until they go past the second exit row because then you're in that territory of potentially getting involuntarily bumped.
That is a really good tip because I forgot that with low cost carriers, since I don't fly these very often, your seat isn't assigned
Yes.
automatically. You can pay extra to have that done, but if you're not paying extra, then it's assigned as you check in. So, yeah, that's a great tip as well that you can kind of monitor what seats are already taken and check in based off of that. But again, it's very data heavy, very intensive. If somebody gaming it to that degree, I would say like maybe just pay what is it, $30 to choose the seat.
No, 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 come on, it's dynamic. You never know what it's gonna be. Like, it depends on the flight, the route, the capacity, it's crazy. Okay, few more things since we're on it. If you are flying in a pair or with children, you are also probably not going to get involuntarily bumped even if you're the last one. And that's not written in the rules, but I see it in experience and I've talked to employees. That's how things work behind the scenes. There's some, if you're solo and you've checked in last, you're getting bumped, unless someone volunteers, of course. And then as for the seats on Spirit, since they don't have a status match open right now, I've had to do this quite a few times. I make videos about this all the time too, but they have a seat bid in advance, but they don't always go through with the seat bid. I don't know why. Like they'll open it up, but then they don't always take the bids. So you can bid in advance for the seat. And what I've seen recently on routes is that the lowest bid on the seat will be 75% of the price at the gate. If you failed to win the seat bid or you didn't place a seat bid, you can also go right when they open up the gate and talk to the gate agent and ask them what they have available in terms of the first class on Spirit or the exit row. And there are numbers in terms of what you can expect to pay per hour. For the first class now, it includes unlimited alcohol and snacks. So it tends to be about $25 per hour to fly that. And the exit rows tend to be somewhere around $6 per hour of flight time. But if you do seat bid right now, I'm seeing that more like $4 per hour or maybe around 20, 25 an hour.
Okay, so seat bid to get upgraded to exit rows or to the nicer, bigger seats, not seat bid to give up your seat and get compensation.
Oh no. No, no, no. Not no. Not like on American Airlines of like, "Hey, would you like to get bumped? Go ahead and choose your flight and choose your compensation." No, this is bidding for seats if you haven't already paid for a seat. But just keep in mind that if you've already paid for a seat, you're not getting any of that money back. So I just wait and then I'll bid or I'll go to the gate and get it. And I'm always in the exit row or in the first class on Spirit.
Nice. Yeah, that's a pretty good tip as well. Anything else that you want to make sure that people know before they close out of this episode as far as like best tips that are fairly general knowledge, but people still keep forgetting?
I think open the emails that they send to you and explore the different routes that are available to you because so many people write off these carriers and they don't want to try it at all. But there's a lot of ways to game the system and make it a really like decent experience at a fraction of the cost. If you're talking about a Delta ticket, any day of the week, it's going to be $300, $400 domestic. It could be $20, $30 with Spirit or Frontier. And if you have received status through a status match or through spending on a credit card, then that's really how much that flight costs. So I think sometimes we just have to remove mental blocks. And even thinking about low cost carriers across the Atlantic, like French Bee or Zip Air or Norse, who I have a lot of experience with, just keep looking into what they offer because they will often offer those premium seats or the premium add ons at a discount. You just have to wait until you receive those emails or go talk to them at the gate.
Great tips. And speaking of great tips, can you give a shout out to some other resources that you would recommend listeners go check out for even more points and miles tips or just general travel tips on how to kind of game the system and save on travel?
Sure. So my favorite creator is Points with Pat. She has a newsletter that I think is really great and a website. And then if you are just getting started out and trying to figure things out, I recommend going one airline at a time and trying to figure out the system because you can't figure out how to game the system until you fully understand the rules of each system.
Great tips. And where can we find you if anybody has any questions about your vast knowledge of low cost carriers and regular carriers as well?
You can find me on TikTok. My TikTok is Top Knots and Layovers, and on my website, topknotsand.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Megan, so much for joining us on the show today. I definitely don't know much at all about low cost carriers. So this was very eye opening of how there's so many different ways to game the system and feel like you're in a normal seat with American Airlines or Delta. If you can figure out how to get upgraded to the front seats or the exit row all the time anyway, then it's a great option for people where they can save hundreds of dollars per trip.
Yeah, just put your little shades, put your shades on, put your slippies on, and then once you're off the plane, no one knows. Go to your five-star hotel anyway.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.